Welcome to the Agilists Aspire and Achieve in Your Agile Career video podcast series. This series is all about helping you grow, thrive, and make an impact in your career and the community with an Agile mindset. Whether you're just starting out or you're an experienced practitioner, we're here to bring you inspiring stories, actionable advice, and meaningful conversations that will help you navigate and excel in your Agile career, meeting some amazing mentors along the way. Get ready to aspire, achieve, and thrive in the next step in your journey. Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good whenever you all are watching this. Welcome to another episode of Agilists Aspire and Achieve podcast series. I'm your host, Emily Lint, and today we're chatting with Tere Given. Tere, how are you doing today?
I am doing well. How are you today?
I'm good. You're in a big white room. Are you in a conference room, by the way?
I have big white spaces sort of at home, and so I just don't like to paint the walls sometimes. All the art in a different section of the room.
You could put a little whiteboard or something like that, or like I've always thought about painting them in chalk, but then I don't want to like deal with the chalk.
Yes. Oh, I agree
I
with
just
that.
want a big crafting space.
I do. My office is rather colorful in that, like, I'm a Disney fan. I'm a Walt Disney World fan.
Oh,
And so I have Mickey Mouse ears as my background usually, but I thought that might be a little too distracting today. So I went for a very white space.
gotcha. Yeah, opposite of mine, chaosness. Just like,
Oh, I think I would have fun with that bookcase.
yeah,
There's probably so many wonderful things back there. I'm a
yeah.
reader.
Oh, cool.
Sometimes it looks like book collector because I don't quite get the chance to read as much as I would want to, but
Yeah,
I love it.
my to be read list is very, very long, so that's fair. This is if you see all the dark motif, right? Dark gold.
Yeah.
This is my fantasy book shelf
Awesome.
with my games down there. And then this bright white, yellow with plaques and stuff like that. This is my office stuff. And
Oh,
then
the two sides
then
of
the games have
you.
snuck over there. More games snuck over there. But otherwise, yeah, office and then handy supplies thing, you know. As I'm sure people who are watching the podcast are going to be like, how's the setup go? And I'll be like, go into Terry's episode where I explain.
Home decor with Terry.
Yeah, home decor with Terry. Woo!
Oh man. Yeah,
No, but
the
yeah.
actual bookcase in my office belongs to my husband and all of his like sci-fi books. And then like I have my professional books sort of stacked on the floor or on this little kid's arts table, somewhat precariously,
No.
because it's right by my desk, and so I can grab them really quickly instead of walking across the room. So I get it. It's the same thing in my household.
Yeah, I try to like have a place for because you always when you have bookshelves behind you, people just assume you're smart. So like, that's what I'm going for. I'm going for that motif,
Oh,
but still artsy.
I believe it. It looks great. It looks comfortable.
Thank you. Thank you.
And if we're working all these hours in a day, comfort is what we want.
I know, and it just makes me happy too. Like this is the thing too. So like just looking ahead and kind of seeing this all day, but then being able to look behind and be like, ooh, I really like this. Like I painted some of those things that you see, and I painted these things, and stuff, and just like seeing some of that and being able to know that after work, I can go read one of my books.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
So I think we're going to talk about this a bit today, which is where I kind of wanted to start off with some, banter-ish back and forth. But we're going to talk about some heavy things today around finding a job after a layoff or after a firing, and that can be really impactful. And to know that all right, I'm gonna put it up. I've been fired.
Same.
Woo! Oh my God! What, girl? What?
I've been
Wow.
fired. Been fired
Yeah,
more than once.
yeah. If it happens, especially as a consultant, you have contracts drop like that, and sometimes you did something, sometimes you don't, sometimes you don't know,
Nope.
So that's just the way that business works today. But we have a lot of people that are working through the massive tech layoffs that have happened in the last, couple years, and Agile's making a huge shift. So we're gonna talk about that today, and I'm excited to dig into this with you. So how did you start and find your Agile career? How did it begin for you?
Um, there's a little bit of a story involved in it, and I talked about it in one of the previous podcasts. But in a nutshell, I was at a conference. There was a book back in the day when you got conference sort of swag, and it was called Scrum at Pega. And I read this and I said, this is what I want to do. And so I just went back to work after my maternity leave. I was on maternity leave shortly after that conference, and I was like, this is what I want to do. Can we do this? And there was a project that was launching, and they were like, sure, why not? I was like, oh, great, let's do it. And that's how I started. And I can't say I did it really well. It took me about 3 years until I was actually properly trained by Scrum.org, took a PSM1 class, found an excellent instructor, and then I think that's really when I started understanding and appreciating Agile. I think before I was doing a lot of the motions, and then it took me about 3 years until I really jumped in.
Okay, gotcha. And what have you observed about the role of career development in Agile over the years? I know you've had a lot of different transitions, in your career, and we'll get into some of those transitions, but have you really seen career development look in the Agile space?
I feel like earlier on there was a lot of sort of movement inside of like the accountabilities. So you might be a product owner and move around sort of in those space. And so you were getting a little bit more of like a well-rounded career experience. Um, I think more and more nowadays we're tending to like silo practitioners.
Mm.
Um, I personally don't love it. I love a well-rounded individual. I love, especially if you are a Scrum Master, like you absolutely have to be able to walk the walk and talk the talk of both a developer and a product owner. Um, I do think that there's a lot of like people skills that are getting a lot more attention, especially in those spaces. And I think that's a great thing because they're usable everywhere. So I think like when we talk about career development, I I personally love like a well-rounded experience, but I think sometimes it's a little bit harder to find these days.
Yeah, yeah, it's really been interesting. I've done now 7 episodes, and I feel like there's this sometimes people are like, we're getting really specialized, or people are getting really specialized, and then on the other side people are getting like really generalized, and then it's like really depending on where you're going and where you're shaping, which for those who are listening can be really complicated as to like, well, what do I do now? And so I'm really curious as when we talk about, I have the prompted question of tell us about transitions that you've had in your career. When you talk about people are getting really specialized, how has that impacted you? Because you've gone from like, tech, product, project management, and how has that kind of made the transitions for you in your career, easier or harder?
Specialization definitely makes it harder. I think for me, leaning on more of those people skills and those broader sort of work patterns makes it easy to transition from one space to another. And so the beauty of agility isn't necessarily those specific practices or those specific things. It's really about the way that you approach the problem and the outcome you're trying to get to. And so whether you're sitting in a space where you're trying to make trying to get sort of teams to work together and to work toward these outcomes and identify them, maybe as a scrum master would, or whether you're sitting in a product space where you have an outcome in mind and you're doing all of that. It's really sort of that practice of like, how do I learn the quickest I can? How do I adjust as I make sense? Like, how do I make things small enough? Like, what does experimentation look like? Those sort of like general themes have helped me in my career sort of switch from role to role. I started in tech as a business analyst, and just kind of exploring all of the different things. It's that sense of curiosity about like, well, what does our system do, or what should our system do, or like what problems are we seeing, and what's the root cause of that? And then like, as you do more and more of that, you start saying like, well, I really want to manage some of these things, or I really want to work with a team to help them identify them or reduce them before it gets to where it needs to be. So just sort of like those softer people generalization skills help you to navigate the more specific skills or specific roles, in my opinion. I
Yeah.
also think it's that general, gosh, curiosity, right? I think for anybody who's listening, like some of the most important things you have are your values. If you don't know them, kind of figure them out, like what you're curious about, and like being able to identify your strengths.
Yeah, love that. Great. So why don't we maybe do like a trade-off of stories,
Yeah.
one, tell us about, the transitions that you've had in your career so people kind of know where you've been, where you're going. I think you had like this wonderful sentence of like, I've been here, 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 and here, you know. And then tell us about like kind of that layoff or that firing that really was most impactful to you, and then I'll share mine as well so that we're kind of coming off of level spaces.
Sure. Like I mentioned, I started my career as a business analyst. And after doing a lot of that work and enjoying a lot of that work, I moved to project management. And then it was shortly after that that I really sort of discovered Agile and was like, oh, this is really interesting, Scrum specifically. And then I was like, I want to do this. And I jumped right in, feet first as a Scrum Master. No real idea of like what that meant. And I think the good and bad of that was that like I without reservation was like this is going to be really good for us. But on the flip side, like I didn't understand the product piece. I didn't understand the development piece. I just kind of went straight to like, all right, I'm going to do this leading piece. Um, and then I realized, like, as I was doing that, like, I was an incomplete Agilist, that I really had to transition out to product and understand that better and transition into development again in order to understand that piece better. And so my career has been a little bit like a table tennis match where it's gone back and forth and back and forth and left and right and off the table
Yeah.
and on the table. But like all of it has just been, it's a really good career. I've been fired more than once. I've been laid off more than once. Um, there are two that are the most impactful in my mind. And the first one was probably I'd been laid off from a job. And then I was in a position where I was like, I needed to take something rather quickly because of financial reasons. And so I took another job, and like I learned so much about being in the wrong organization at the
Mm.
wrong time.
Wrong organization, wrong time. Yeah.
And I took that job. I did not mix well at all in that organization. It just completely opposition. Within the first couple months, I was looking to recruit out. I drove home every night crying. It
Oh,
depended on what day of the week it was. It could have been I was crying to my mom, or the other day of the week, it was crying to my best friend. And it was a long drive home, so there was a lot of tears and tissues. But thankfully, I was fired after 3 months. And I don't think they had the first sentence out of like this isn't working, that I breathed a very deep sigh of relief and said, you know what? This means I never have to come back here. And I was like that first initial shock, and then it was almost immediate relief. And so like that had a really profound impact on me in the terms that like I now realized that like it matters where you go. It matters what organization you join if you decide to join another organization. And so like that helped me understand that like as I'm looking for other opportunities, I do really need to be mindful about sort of the space that I'm going into and what the values, not only my values, but the values of the company, and how do I align with that, make sense. And then probably the other one that is I it's hard to be like really proud of a moment where you really get off because it sounds somewhat counterintuitive, but I was consulting at a space, and the product we were working on just didn't make sense anymore. And so like the really proper ethical thing to do is to shut it down. And so I was working with a product owner, and we were working through like, well, should we shut this down? Shouldn't we shut this
mhm.
down? But like I'm contracted there, right? So like when you shut that down, I don't have a paycheck anymore. But it was the right thing to do. It was the ethical thing to do. And so, long story short, we sort of like talked to those stakeholders. We shut down the project, and I lost my job. But
Yeah.
because it was the right thing to do, I still think it was like it was such a growing experience for me as an Agilist to know that like it's not just that we say these principles and we say these values and we say that this is the right thing to do, that like we do the right thing. And sometimes that means there's a negative effect to us in the short term, but I think it made me a better professional.
Yeah. Like sometimes this product doesn't make sense. The solution, this transformation doesn't make sense anymore. So why am I doing it? Why are we doing it? Because I know that, and I definitely resonate with that feeling of like, should I be proud of this? That like there is, and I'm feeling it like in my chest, like a kind of I'm doing some mindfulness body practice around like the feelings that I have and where do I feel them, and so I feel the firing and the failure, the fear of failure, like in my chest. So when I think back on like the first time that I ever got fired was when I was, God, how old was I? I was 22, 21, 21 or 22. Yeah, I was 21. And I did something that was wild for 21, where I went and traveled to Oklahoma City. I was working for a point of sale system for a food service, big food service. You'd know it, but I won't share the company. And sorry, man, I did not know this was going to be hard to talk about because I don't think I've really shared this story with too many people in a long time. But I went there and I was asked to basically go in and get all the documentation that you could and honestly replace the help desk that is there now and the people that are there now. We're going to become the new contractors for those guys. They're looking to evolve that help desk. And it transitioned later on into they were going to become tier 2 support and we were going to be tier 1 support, which definitely would have been great to know in the beginning, but they also knew that. So they came in, they saw me coming in as like a 20-year-old. I was like, and going, she's going to take our jobs, right? And there was 15 people that I was like enemy number one. They didn't want to tell me anything, They didn't want to set up anything, didn't want to tell me anything. And I was in a completely different culture than I had been previously, And I was isolated in there by myself. So to think about the type of impact that made on me emotionally as like a growing, I was doing
As a young professional.
As a young professional. There you go. So the impact that made, and then I came back from that, established the whole help desk, and trained and hired 9 different people, and then went into the practice of it with 9 other people who were heavily reliant on my knowledge and my expertise, while having another side of things where I still had to deal with some of the drama, some of the politics around the team that had now been elevated to that tier 2 support that still didn't really want to work with me or my help desk. And I struggled to get out of bed in the morning. I was 2-3 hours late multiple times. I struggled to get up. I struggled to get there. This was also like during winter at one point in time. It was kind of close to where, we were going. And I can feel it now, like the mental and emotional toll on me. And I saw like shadows and I saw enemies everywhere, basically at that point. So to your point of like it really needing to happen, it really needed to happen.
And your body was telling you
Yeah.
that wasn't a good environment for you. And I think sometimes we miss that, or we really only see it in hindsight.
Yeah. And I think I was just like, come on, Emily, like I have such a mover and grower and persevere type, person. And even now with my mindfulness on my body, that's because I was ignoring those cues. I just thought, man, I was just really, depressed and I just needed to get through this. I just needed to work through this. And it's all these other people. I was like blaming external, people on something that I was warring with internally, that I just wasn't able to have the empathy to feel. And so I had to grow from that, and I had to shift and change and figure out, to your point of what are the types of values that I want and that I need. And honestly, I didn't know what they were until a couple jobs later. And that's when I found Agile. That's when I found a supportive mentoring group. That's when I found that I didn't have to fight people to get my opinions heard. And I had people that if I messed up, they were willing to help me instead of reject me, right? So, that was hard. Thank you, Theresa, for opening up a space for this. Because I'm sure it can be, that was hard for me. And I've talked on this podcast many times.
Well, and it's really interesting as a young professional and I think time gives us lots of exposure to many different things. That like if you were in that situation today and it was different, like you were probably better equipped with different skills to help with the requests that you're having and the empathy for all of those other people, right? Because we've lived a little bit more and we've talked to many more people over the time that like it's really interesting that like today the way that we would approach things and like the benefit of hindsight, I think is really interesting. And I think when we look at like, we're not taking advantage maybe of like the hindsight of other people sometimes, that like when we're in those positions where we're struggling and to your point, like you feel it very strongly internally and you're like, oh, it's that person or it's the other person. I am a blame myself first for everything kind of person. So like when things aren't going wrong, I'm like, well, what are you doing wrong? Like, what are you doing differently? Like, what you like? I sometimes put the weight of the world on my shoulders, and that's not a healthy solution either. But in some of those situations, like if I had just reached out, right, to the benefit of somebody who's had more exposure or experience to me and like learned from them, I think sometimes when we're sitting in those bad positions and we feel so constricted and so constrained and like so like you just kind of like not want to be here and you not want to be anywhere. I think the opposite is almost a really healthy way to approach it is like learn to be more in the environment, learn from others, and maybe not the people at that organization where you were working, but like learn from mentors or learn from other like peers in the space. One of the nice things that has happened in the last couple of years is that we have a more open and digital way to communicate with people, and it's becoming it's effectively like everywhere now, or maybe it hasn't been 10 years ago, that like we can reach peers on the other sides of the planet and say like, hey, I'm struggling with this problem and gain different perspectives.
Yeah. And I think for me, a big lesson that I've learned is really recognizing that emotional toll earlier, because it'll get to a point to where even one of my last like long engagements, I didn't get laid off, but I quit from that job. And it really had to do with the emotional toll because I was the person that people were going to because they were dealing with a lot and they were working through a lot. And Simon Sinek actually did a really interesting interview recently. I don't agree with everything that he said. I'll bear in mind that, because he kind of throws a lot out at the millennial generation. But he does make a point about like finding people in your organization to be the empathy anchors and how that is so rough on the people who are the empathy anchors for people in your organization. And now I kind of know that one, I shouldn't be the empathy anchor for everybody in an organization just because I'm the open feeling one, the one that's like, like available, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then I should also have an anchor outside of the organization for things that are emotional or hard, because usually if there's a person that I want to go to, that might be also the person that everybody else goes to, right? And I don't know. I feel like I should have, one, turned people down more, but in a nice way of like, trying not to always be that person or created boundaries of like, hey, I know this is really hard. Can we actually just talk about this after work? or go to a happy hour, go do that, and then like we can talk about it. Because I would get into these big emotional conversations about like, oh, this manager, blah, 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 like in the middle of the day, and that's hard.
It is, and you can't always deplete your cup in the effort to fill someone else's. And balance is such a hard thing. Not just here, emotional balance, but like just in general in life, balance is very, very difficult to to hold and to maintain. And I I used to kid around with the people that like I when I'm doing really well professionally, I'm not doing really well personally.
Yeah.
And the flip of it, when I'm doing really well personally, like I'm not doing really well professionally. And I find, at least for myself, that even now I'm a working professional. I have two school age kids. I'm working on my MBA. I mentor people. My kids have probably too many activities, but they love them all. That it's just like I have to step back from certain things because I put too much pressure on myself on one way or another. So like, maybe we'll really focus on like school activities, and maybe I won't do as much at work, right? Maybe I'll sort of like take a little bit less responsibility or facilitate a little bit more, do a little bit more something else where I can sort of shift that the amount of time I'm spending there. It's hard to get that balance, and that balance doesn't look the same day from day.
Yeah. But I love the questions that you're asking yourself, around that and being knowledgeable about the things that you will sacrifice or you have sacrificed in the past. Like even you kind of keyed in on a really interesting thing of like, oh, I blame myself first, right? And, I always think, oh, what did I do? This is me. And I feel like I honestly do the opposite because I like internally blame myself first, but then I go, I don't like that. That's too painful. Somebody else did it, right? Like I don't like the pain that this engages in me, so I'm going to blame somebody else. And so usually if like for example, I've gotten like Slack messages and I've been like, "Oh god, why are they asking that damn question 5 times?" Like I've asked this or like, "Why are we talking about messaging? This is so stupid," and stuff like that. Like I'll have that immediate like knee-jerk reaction to it where I'm like angry or upset at somebody else and then I go, that's now I've been doing, the internal work of like what does that tell me about how I'm feeling? Right? Like, am
Hmm.
I, oh, okay, that's coming in and they're talking about messaging. I'm afraid that I've said something incorrectly, or I'm afraid that I've already messed up. How do I defend myself? Right? And so I go into that place of defense, and that's a defense mechanism, right? So I know there's a little off topic. It's almost like we're kind of talking about like pre-layoff, or pre-firing. Like how do we kind of know that like the cards are starting to lay out? Like maybe this is time for a transition.
Yeah, and I think maybe to your point, like we all have a default response. Mine is to blame myself and then start looking for solutions. Yours might be to blame other people. My husband, I like to say, is always a no first guy, right? His response is no. But you have to like for him, you got to sell it to him. For me,
Yeah.
I've got to stop and think like what could I have done differently? And then once I've satisfied that like maybe I could have done something differently or couldn't, like I did everything I could, then I start saying like, well, how do we build from here, right? So for someone who's gone through a layoff, I think what I would love to tell you is like do a little bit of reflection. See what good is in that message, if there is. Um, Maybe do a little bit of self like, was there something I could have done, something I couldn't have done? Was I not as effective in how I was communicating with people? That like, you know, was it the wrong environment? Did I not pay attention to signs during interviews or anything else that like would have told me that this wasn't a good environment for me? But then take that, learn from it, and like then then we move on because the past doesn't change. We're people who are growing and evolving every single day, hopefully. And the best that we can do is take the knowledge we've gleaned and use it moving forward. And so, you know, I there's great dignity in work. There's great dignity in doing work. And so when you're either fired or you're laid off, it is such an emotional toll. But like just recognize that it becomes clearer, I think, in time, and that like you are not the only person in this system that didn't work. That didn't, when I say work, I mean like that didn't work out, right? Like when we look at the system, when we talk about like the organization, the hiring people and the other people that you work with as well as yourself, like all of those components, there was a there was a mismatch. And
Yeah.
so it wasn't just you. It wasn't you. Could have been you, but it wasn't you.
Well, and I kind of, so I want to tease out a little bit more some of the technical advice you might have around, how do you manage the emotional toll post job loss? How do we kind of keep that dignity and understand, our fear of failure and what are the things that we could have done and how do we move forward, right? So, for example, I just came out of, uh, they decided not to go with me as the coach moving forward for a contract, right? And part of me knows that it had to do with my performance. And part of me knows that it also had to do with that I don't feel like I was a really good fit for that organization anymore. I was feeling not very good after that contract. And I also went through a lot. I dealt with grief, for example, for the first time as a professional, which I'm very lucky. It's my first time having to deal with grief as a professional. And I did not know how much that would rock me and rock my ability to work. So I'm dealing with kind of that dichotomy of like, I know I could have done better, but also that probably wasn't the environment for me if they really didn't understand, because I also felt like I wasn't being emotionally supported or really that they cared because of I was an external consultant.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's very difficult. Like when you walk, like when you're no longer at an organization and you're walking away or they're encouraging you to walk away. Um, I think and the problem is you only really sometimes have half the story or some maybe one small part of their story because they're giving you like maybe a paragraph explanation of like why you weren't selected or why you weren't extended. um, I think for me again, I think it goes a lot into introspection. I think it goes a lot into, I don't want to say forgiveness, but acceptance of what you've done, right? So in that organization, you met the needs as you understood them to be, and you brought the skills that you have. I do not believe that anybody goes to work and says, you know what? I am not going to do my job today. I'm going to do the worst thing I can do for this company. And blah, ha, ha, I'm going to wreak chaos. I just don't think that's not what we do as people, right? We really want to do impactful work. We want to do meaningful work, um, and we want to make a difference. And so I do think that sometimes things aren't a fit, and like the best thing we can do is like take a look at that gap. Like when did I start feeling maybe that things weren't a fit, or if
Mm,
I was blindsided, like what what did I miss? What do I know now that I didn't know now or didn't know before? And like really sort of pay attention to that gap because that is what we're going to use moving forward to say, hey, this next opportunity is going to be interesting. Or I'm going to stop and say, like, I don't think I brought the right skills that that organization needs. Is that a skill I want to add to my toolbox? Or did I do a bad job in client selection? Because we want to be in places where we can make a difference, where we're ensuring that there's value in the client coach relationship. And when we can't do that, the ethical thing to do is to make awareness and to, figure out a way forward. And either that's like we figure it out together, client and coach together, we work together to do that, or I maybe make a referral for someone else. Like it's just, it's hard if we hold it. If we learn from it, it gets a little bit easier. It makes us better. It makes our process better, right? As you're looking for those next clients, you're going to be saying, like, you're going to be asking more targeted questions, like, what kind of skills are you looking for, maybe, or like, what are the outcomes that you're looking for? What have you tried before? And just kind of getting a sense for, like, am I going to make a difference here? And I do also believe that there's sometimes that where we can take an organization or we can take a client to a certain point and then their needs change that we are not a match for. But there's a victory in that. There's a victory in that. Like you've moved that client forward to a space where there's now another solution for them. And it's okay that it's not you because you have a unique niche that you do. You have a unique skill set, you have a unique experience, you have a unique background that you do. It's okay that you don't fit.
Yeah. I think too, thinking back on like, the experience that I had, like, and feel free to, kind of bring up from the experiences you had, kind of one of the lessons you took from it. So one of the things that I took from that recent layoff is really this feeling of deposability that I was struggling with, that I didn't really know that I was struggling with as an external consultant. And the feeling of not being able to connect with my coworkers in a way that I did when I was in a corporate setting. And it's been one of the reasons why I'm actually thinking about transitioning back into a 9 to 5 corporate setting, is because I'm as I'm getting older and as I'm thinking about starting a family and having a house, I really want to be able to be around people who understand or are going through similar things. And so it's less of, as a consultant, you come in and you're 120% for the 6 months or year or what have you that they have you, and that's,
Hmm.
you're really, you're constantly on call, you're constantly giving 120%. And especially, when you're going through hard things in your life, it really doesn't, like, especially with this client, they really didn't want to know or need to know, in my mind at that point in time. Versus, like, if I'm working at an organization, that's something that they should know and I should talk to them about and be like, hey, manager, I might need to adjust some times or I might need to go on bereavement. But you can't do that as an external consultant, not in the same way, without having impact basically to your career. So, what have been some of the things that you've taken away to help you either work through layoffs or, firings, things like that, to kind of come back to experiences in a healthier place?
Um, I've taken away in each of these situations where I've either been laid off or fired. I I usually walk away with, and this might sound counterintuitive, but a sense of gratitude because I consider myself an experienced collector. And so my career is nothing but a whole string of experiences that I've been fortunate enough to do, or conversations I've been fortunate enough to have. And so the first thing I do try to like center on is, well, one of the many things I try to center on is just gratitude. And like, I, for those relationships, and I think, you're hitting a really good point, which is like when you're an external consultant, those relationships are so much more difficult to gain and to sustain with people at that organization. But I do believe that those relationships are very healthy and that those are things that we need to take away in a very healthy way because those are things that help us again sort of move forward. So from a corporate setting, like those peer relationships are really important. Probably in an external setting, what you're looking toward as peers are like other people in the professional sort of space versus people maybe in that client space because your client demands a different set of sort of things from you that they're not really your peer, right? Because they're here because you do amazing things and you do unique things that they don't have in house. That your peers are probably outside of that. And those are the hard or the really interesting relationships you need to nurture so that, like, again, you're growing as a professional, you're using different skills, you're um, learning new things that you need to learn about. I have a book of books, but inside that book of books are also a book of topics where I'm like, oh, somebody mentioned this topic, and now I need to go down that rabbit hole for a little while as well. But like when again with layoffs and like with firings, I think the best thing to take away is gratitude for the opportunity, new relationships, um, the ones that matter and the ones that don't, because those people will make themselves known to you by their actions. um, and just take away a sense of like you should have a sense of accomplishment because you, even if you weren't the right fit, or if like the decision on layoff is just based sort of on numbers, like there's a sense of accomplishment. There's a sense of like I've done good things with my time here, and maybe the disconnect was they were expecting A and I was able to deliver B. But if B is a competency they didn't have before, you're still accomplishing something. That's still something that you've done. And so for anyone who's listening, what I really would love is that like try not to take these things very personally, because often I don't think, no, there are certain times when it's like very much like you as a person doesn't work out in this organization. And I've had that, right? Like I said, I breathed very happy sighs of relief when I was fired. so,
Yeah, but
so there
that's,
are
I
definitely
don't know,
times.
that to me calls the like, it probably was a good idea because if it's too personalized of a culture, to where like, well, you as a person is a bad person, and it's like, whoa, 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 hey,
Well,
like that's unnecessary.
I was definitely a bad fit there. Um, but it doesn't take away from my accomplishments in the organization. It doesn't take away from any of the things that I did. It's just that like I was not what they were looking for, and they conversely were not what I was looking for. I think one of the other things for people to understand is like this is definitely two-way, right? And so the organization or the client might be saying like, "Hey, thank you for showing up, but we don't need you to do that anymore." But like you also, like sometimes I think, and I'll speak on my own experience, like I've become complacent for too long. I've become comfortable in a space for too long. And so in a situation where like maybe you've been laid off or you've been fired, like were you really looking to move anyhow? Right? That organization no longer was serving you maybe in the same way that like you were no longer serving them. And so I don't know. My opinion is
Yeah.
that like there's definitely times when in retrospect sort of a job transition is a good thing. And I think time makes all of that evident. One of the other times that I was laid off, a company was downsizing, and there were exactly two people who did my job, myself and another person who's a very, very good friend of mine, even 15, 20 years later. Um, and I was like, why was I, like, of the two of us, like, I had a stronger skill set. I was, my customers loved me, et cetera, et cetera. I was like, why was it me? And I spent a long time trying to figure out, like, why it was me. But that didn't help me, right? Because I still needed to find another job. But as time went on, what I realized more and more, because people tend to share things, as they divorce themselves from that incident or that occurrence, is like it was me because I had the ability to bounce back. This other person didn't have the skills, like they needed this job. And so it was somewhat of an empathetic response on the employer's behalf to say, like, putting Terry out into the workplace. Terry can find the skills, she can compete in this market. Um, that like that was one of the reasons why. And so I'm not saying that's the case for everybody, but sometimes it's not the obvious things that might be top of mind when that occurs to you.
Yeah. This is almost feeling like a career counseling, like
It does.
like firing counseling. We're both kind of talking about things and supporting each other and things like that. So we're coming up at kind of the top of the hour, the end of our session here, and there's still so many things, so we could like, keep going on stuff, you know. Um, but what are you doing for your own professional growth right now?
um, right now, I am focusing on getting my MBA. So talked a little bit about before that there's many sort of like balls in the air that I'm trying to juggle right now with kids and back to school and work and all those things. But I'm working on my MBA to become probably a better, more well-rounded professional. But one of the other things I'm doing is investing heavily in mentoring others because it's a skill set I didn't think that I was doing a really good job of, that I wanted to get more exposure to it and more diversity in who I am mentoring and what topics I'm able to mentor in. So I've started to pay attention to that. And usually what happens is I start with looking at like the Agile coach growth wheel, and I go, well, what don't I think I'm really good at and that I probably should be a little bit better at? And then I start picking out like, what makes sense for me. And then I start brainstorming about like, where can I go do this or get this exposure? And I've landed on mentoring for 2024.
Cool. Very exciting. Are you in the Women in Agile Mentor program?
I did the first cohort in
Okay, awesome.
2024 this year, and I
Okay.
applied for the second cohort in 2024. I think by the time this is published, the deadline would have passed for anyone to either apply as a mentor or mentee. But if any of our viewers have, hopefully I will see you either as a mentor or as a mentee.
All right, sounds good. And what final wisdom would you like to share with our listeners? I think one of the things you wanted to talk about was like, how do you transition to work that interests you? So, what's kind of your final wisdom there?
Sure. My final wisdom on most things is this when it comes to career. You are the product owner of your career. Whether you serve as a Scrum Master, a developer, a manager, a whatever, a product owner, you are the product owner of your career. Your career is a product that you do need to nurture and care for. And that means at all times. You can't turn it off. You can't turn, like, this isn't a light switch, right? You always have to be kind of present and mindful of what's happening and how we take that and how we grow from that. So it's the first thing I want people to sort of like understand is that like you're the product owner of your career. And sometimes that means you enter periods of reflection. Sometimes that means you enter periods of activity, and there's a cycle there. Um, I think the other thing that's really important, and we touched on it too, is that like you have to understand your values because that leads you to opportunities, leads you to what I like to think are better opportunities that are suited for you. So understanding my core values, and we talked about this a little, but like I didn't I didn't like specifically identify my core values until I was probably in my late 30s, early 40s. And I took a class and they were like, "Hey, what are your values? Write them down." And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know." So I spent some time exploring that. And it's made a world of difference when I look for companies because I look for companies that have or place importance on those things as well. So for me, knowledge is one of them, and I look for organizations that support professional growth. And I ask specifically when I'm interviewing with people, like, how does this company support your professional growth? What do you do for your professional growth when I'm interviewing with someone? Because I don't want the canned answer. I want to know what it means to you. And so I bring my values into the conversation in order to make decisions about is this the right fit for me or is this not the right fit for me? But also we talked a little, like I said, about strengths. Like you have to understand your strengths. I know, like right now, I have a bit of a gap in mentoring. I think I have a bit of a gap in mentoring, and I want to get stronger at it. But I wouldn't necessarily go to an organization where in the job posting, mentoring is listed a bunch of times because like I don't know that I have that strength to the degree that the organization would want. So like I'm always doing that comparison. Like do I think I can do I think I can obtain it that it still makes sense to apply? Or do I think it's best suited that like they're looking for a different kind of candidate? That's also okay, right? Because you don't want to get into a situation where work doesn't feel good to you because you took the wrong opportunity. And then I always like to apply like a layer of curiosity, right? Like, what am I curious about? And like, where can I go? Like, what can I explore? So, one of my core values, again, is knowledge. And so, like, I'm always like, well, what would happen? Like, what does Agile look like in, say, a higher education look like?
Mhm.
And I might go explore opportunities there, like go looking at like where are the intersection of these things? Like, are there opportunities there? Could I exploit that? Could I look at that? Could I even create the opportunity if it made sense? Or, like if you were interested in the environment, like, well, what does the intersection of agile and environment look like? And like, where can I go look for that? So like I think that those three things are really important, as well as just the underlying sort of premise that like as a product owner of your career, you're always looking for something. You're always preparing for that next transition.
Great. Wonderful. Well, Thank you for coming on today, Tere, and thank you everyone for listening to this episode of the Women in Agile, Agilists Aspire and Achieve podcast series. It's brought to you in partnership from Women in Agile nonprofit, Scrum.org, and Agile Careers nonprofit. We hope you've learned something new and invite you to tell a friend or a coworker about the podcast. Please go online to womeninagile.org or onto the YouTube series channel to learn more about our initiatives and find more inspiring podcast conversations. Thank you so much, Tere, for your time today and the little therapy session that we had.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for taking me down memory lane. It's always good to reflect.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Agilists, Aspire and Achieve in Your Career. We hope you found inspiration and practical tips to elevate your Agile journey. Remember, growth doesn't happen alone, so consider exploring the Women in Agile Mentorship Program and/or follow the Agile Careers MPO on LinkedIn to see more content geared towards advancing your careers. A huge thank you to our amazing sponsors, Scrum.org, for their continued support in empowering Agile professionals and creating opportunities for career advancement. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know what topics you'd love to see next. Keep aspiring, keep achieving, and continue thriving in your career.